Welcome to Dark Whispers Stories, a place of silence where mysterious stories blend with the sounds of nature. Outside, the rain is falling steadily, each drop gently tapping on the eaves like the gentle melodies of the night. Lie down comfortably, let the sound of the rain wash away all your worries, and let yourself fall into peace. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and feel each breath you take blend with the rhythm of the falling rain. Tonight, I will tell you a story slowly, gently, like the whisper of the wind through the window, like the dripping water outside, taking you into a deep dream. Let your mind get lost in this rain, let each word take you away from reality. Shall we begin? Story 1. The Burning House, the secret behind the strange noises. Have you ever walked past a burned-down house, but felt like it was still alive, still breathing, and even watching you? This is the story of such a house, where reality and horror intersect, making anyone who hears it feel the chills. Jack and Emily, two best friends since college, are always passionate about exploring mysterious places. On a trip through the remote suburbs, they saw an old, blackened house standing alone in the middle of a field. The charred wood, broken window frames, and the air filled with an unusual burning smell. All seemed to tell a forgotten story. Emily, with uncontrollable curiosity, said, "Jack, have you heard about this house? People say it burned down 10 years ago, but people still hear footsteps and whispering voices inside." Jack laughed, pretending not to be afraid. "It must be some stray cats. You're too scared." But their curiosity didn't stop there. Under the red sunset, the two decided to enter the house. Strange noises. As soon as they stepped inside, a cold wind blew through, causing the door behind them to slam shut. Emily flinched, and Jack tried to stay calm. "It's probably just the wind. Don't worry." But then, something was wrong. From upstairs, they heard light, but uneven footsteps, as if someone was shuffling. Emily whispered, "Jack, did you hear that?" Jack nodded, but instead of turning around, he walked forward. "We have to check. Someone might really be here." Whispers in the dark. They climbed the stairs, step by step, the wooden floor creaking under their feet. When they reached the second floor, everything became eerily quiet. But then, just when they thought it was all an illusion, a whisper rang out. "Leave, before it's too late." Emily trembled, holding Jack tightly. "Jack, let's go out." But Jack shook his head, trying to find the source of the sound. In a room at the end of the hallway, he saw an old, burned notebook lying on the floor. The secret of the house. Opening the notebook, they discovered that it was the diary of a girl named Lily, who had lived in this house. The shaky lines told of the horror she had endured. Her parents had died in a mysterious fire in this very house, but Lily believed it was no accident. "The fire wasn't caused by us. Someone did it. They wanted us gone." The last lines of the diary left Jack and Emily speechless. "They're here. And I know, one day, they will come back to take my soul." Unexpected ending. Suddenly, a loud noise came from downstairs. Footsteps were rushing, as if someone was running up the stairs. Both of them turned around, but the hallway was empty. Jack shouted, "Run, Emily!" They rushed out of the house, but as soon as they got outside, they looked back. The door was closed, and from the window, they saw the shadow of a girl standing looking at them. Her eyes were empty and sad. From that day on, Jack and Emily never returned to that house again. But every time they thought about it, they still felt like someone was watching them from afar. Do you dare to step into such places? Share your thoughts in the comments section and tell us the mysterious stories you have experienced. Don't forget to like, follow, and share if you want to hear more scary stories like this. We are always waiting for the next dramatic discoveries. Story 2. The Burning House, Whispers from the Ashes. The house stood silently in the middle of a desolate land, covered by tall weeds that hid the remaining traces of the tragedy 10 years ago. The towering blackened walls, the empty window frames like empty eye sockets, all seemed to tell a dark story that no one dared to mention. Although the people around the area often avoided the house, rumors about strange noises coming from there never stopped. And that was also the reason why Michael and Sarah, two friends with a passion for exploration, decided to find out the truth. That afternoon, the sky was gray as if it was about to rain, but Michael and Sarah did not care. They stood in front of the scorched door of the house, feeling a cold air seeping through every inch of their skin. Sarah swallowed, trying to speak confidently, but still showing a slight tremor in her voice. Michael, do you think this is a good idea? This place doesn't seem like a place I should be walking into. Michael shrugged, trying to sound calm. It's just an old house. I've heard a bunch of similar stories, but they're all just imagination. Let's go in and take some pictures and then go. The door creaked as it was pushed open, revealing a dark interior, covered in dust and ash. A faint burnt smell still lingered, making Sarah wrinkle her nose. This smells like a fire that was put out yesterday, she muttered, her eyes scanning the room anxiously. Michael turned on his flashlight and led the way in. In the dim light, the charred furniture appeared like ghosts. A wooden table was reduced to its bare skeleton, chairs were toppled, and a painting hung crookedly on the wall with burnt patches. But what caught Sarah's attention was the photo frame lying on the floor. She picked it up, brushing away the dust and ash to reveal a picture of a family of 3, a young couple and a girl of about 10. Their smiles in the photo were happy, but their eyes held an indescribable sadness. Sarah stared, then asked softly, "Who do you think this is?" "The old owners of this house?" Michael glanced over, shrugging. "Maybe. But they're not here anymore. Don't think too much about it." As Michael finished speaking, a faint sound came from upstairs. Sarah froze, her eyes widening. "Michael, did you hear that?" Michael stopped, listening. Footsteps. Very light, but clear. It seemed to be moving slowly from one room to another. He looked at Sarah, forcing a reassuring smile, even as his heart began to grow anxious. "It could be a stray cat. Let me go check." The two of them walked slowly up the stairs, each step making the old wooden floor creak. When they reached the second floor, they found a dark hallway leading to a door that was ajar. The light from Michael's flashlight shone through, but it couldn't penetrate the thick darkness inside the room. Michael pushed the door open, and the two of them entered. The room was almost empty, save for an old iron bed and a charred dresser. But on the floor, right next to the bed, was a scorched notebook. Sarah bent down to pick it up, opened it, and read the scribbled words inside. "The fire has come. I can't escape. They're here, and they're never leaving." Sarah shivered, turning a few more pages. The following pages were filled with the same words over and over again. "They look at me. They whisper in my ear. They won't let me go. Michael, I don't like this place. Something's very wrong. We should leave now." Before Michael could answer, a loud noise came from downstairs. Footsteps. But this time, they weren't soft, they were hurried, as if someone were running up the stairs. Sarah clutched Michael's hand in panic. "There's someone here," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Michael pulled her into the hallway, but as they reached the stairs, the footsteps stopped abruptly. Everything was eerily silent, but the air seemed thicker, heavier. They dashed down the stairs, but the front door slammed shut in their faces. Sarah tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. At that moment, a whispering voice rang out, seemingly from all directions, "Don't go." Michael grabbed his flashlight, turned around, and shone it around the room. In the dim light, he saw a figure standing at the top of the stairs. It was a little girl, with burned skin and empty, lifeless eyes. The figure didn't move, just stood there staring at them. Michael screamed, pushing the door open with all his might. It swung open, and they both rushed out, running until the house was no longer visible. When Sarah turned back, she saw the little girl's figure standing by the second-floor window, her eyes still fixed on them. Michael and Sarah never returned to that house again. But Sarah often dreamed of the little girl's eyes and the haunting whisper, "Don't go." Story 3. Flashing lights, signals from the dark. Daniel had just moved into a new apartment in the city center. It was a compact space, but cozy enough for a single person. Everything was fine for the first week, until he noticed something strange. The light in the living room would occasionally flicker on and off for no reason. At first, he assumed the bulb was old and needed to be replaced, but even after changing the bulb, the phenomenon continued. Late one night, while Daniel was sitting on the sofa watching TV, the ceiling light in the living room began to flicker. The flickering light made him frown. "How annoying," he muttered, standing up to check the switch. But as soon as he touched it, the light went out, leaving the room in complete darkness. Daniel sighed, turned on the flashlight on his phone to see, but then he heard a small, very faint sound coming from the corner of the room. The noise sounded like soft footsteps, or someone moving. He pointed his flashlight toward it, but saw nothing but an old recliner and a small table. It must be the wind, he reassured himself, but the uneasy feeling did not go away. The next morning, Daniel called an electrician to check the system. After a moment of searching, the electrician confirmed that there was nothing wrong. "Everything is fine. Probably just a temporary problem," he said, patting Daniel on the shoulder before leaving. Daniel tried to shake off his worries, but as night fell, the lights in the living room began to flicker again. This time, they didn't just flicker, they flickered on and off in a strange rhythm, as if someone was trying to send a signal. Daniel sat motionless in his chair, staring at the light. He told himself that he was imagining things, but then the lights went out again. In that moment of absolute silence, he heard a soft breathing, right behind him. Daniel spun around, but no one was there. His throat was dry, his hand shaking as he reached for his phone. He turned on the camera and panned around the room, hoping to find something that could explain it. In the light from the camera, Daniel saw a shadowy figure move across the wall, just near the door leading into the hallway. He froze. "Who's there?" he shouted, but there was no answer. A cold air blew past him, making him feel as if someone had just walked past him. The next morning, Daniel told his best friend, Rachel, about this. She listened attentively and suggested, "You should install a camera in the house to see what's going on. Sometimes there are things that the naked eye can't see." Daniel followed Rachel's advice, installing a small camera in the corner of the living room. That night, when the lights started flickering, he tried to stay calm, sitting still in the chair and letting the camera do its thing. The next morning, Daniel reviewed the video. At first, everything looked normal, but around midnight, he saw a shadow flash across the frame. It wasn't clear, but it had the shape of a person standing in the middle of the room, under the flickering light of the lamp. Daniel slowed down the video, and this time, he saw it more clearly. The figure didn't move, just stood still, facing the camera, before disappearing when the light went out. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. He called Rachel over, and they both watched the video again. Rachel, who always claimed to be not superstitious, paled. "You need to leave, Daniel. If there's something here, it's not you." But Daniel couldn't leave right away. He decided to find out more about the apartment's history. When he looked it up online, he discovered that the previous tenant had died in an accident in this very living room. The victim was a young man, living alone, and the accident happened right at midnight, while he was repairing the lighting system. That night, Daniel didn't dare turn off the lights. He sat on his bed, trying to read a book to forget what had happened. But at exactly midnight, the bedroom light started flickering. And this time, there was more than just breathing. He could clearly hear a soft voice saying, "I don't want to be alone." Daniel screamed and ran out of the apartment with nothing but his phone. He never returned, and the apartment remained silent, its lights flickering in the darkness, like a cry for help from a forgotten soul. The strange knock, a message from beyond. Samantha moved to a small house in the suburbs after a long time living in the city. She loved the quiet of the area and hoped it would be the perfect place to start anew after the events of the past. The house was simple but cozy, with a small garden in front and a white picket fence surrounding it. But the peace did not last long. The first night, Samantha was sitting in the living room reading a book when she heard 3 knocks on the door. The sound was clear, as if someone was standing right in front of the door. Samantha put down the book, walked to the door and opened it, but there was only quiet darkness outside. No one was there. She frowned, looked around for a moment before closing the door, thinking she must have misheard. But on the second night, the same thing happened. 3 knocks, regular, rang out at exactly 11 p.m. This time, Samantha did not open the door right away. She pressed her ear to the door, trying to hear any other sounds. But other than the slight wind blowing, there was nothing. She opened the door, and once again, there was no one there. An uneasy feeling began to creep in, but Samantha reassured herself that it was probably just someone playing a prank, or some random phenomenon that she didn't quite understand. On the third night, Samantha decided to wait. She sat on the sofa, staring intently at the front door. The clock on the wall read exactly 11 o'clock, and as if following some pattern, the knocking sounded again. This time, she quickly jumped up, opened the door immediately, but all she saw was an empty yard. She began to feel really scared. Samantha closed the door, locked it carefully, and called her best friend, Jessica. Jessica listened to the story seriously, then said, "Sam, maybe someone is trying to get your attention. But if no one is there, you should try putting a camera in front of the door or something to check." Samantha followed Jessica's advice. She placed a bowl of water in front of the door, a trick that Jessica said could help reflect images of things that were invisible to the naked eye. That night, when the knock came on the door, Samantha did not open the door right away. She looked into the bowl of water, and a cold feeling ran down her spine. In the bowl of water, there was a blurry figure, standing right in front of the door. Samantha screamed, backed away, and stumbled to the floor. When she regained her composure, she opened the door, but there was still nothing outside. The feeling of confusion and fear kept her awake all night. The next morning, Samantha decided to find out about the history of the house. She discovered that, 5 years ago, a man who had lived in this house had mysteriously disappeared. People in the area said that before he disappeared, he often said that he heard knocking on the door every night, but when he opened the door, he never found anyone. Samantha felt like she was falling into the same cycle. That night, she decided to confront him. When the knocking sounded, she did not open the door immediately but asked loudly, "Who is there? What do you want from me?" There was a long silence, but then she heard a soft voice from the other side of the door, "Open the door. I need help." Samantha hesitated, her hand shaking as she turned the doorknob. But when she opened it, instead of seeing a man, she only saw a small piece of paper lying right on the threshold. On it was a single scrawled line, "Don't believe a word I say." Samantha slammed the door, feeling extremely scared. She called Jessica and told her the whole story. Jessica advised her to leave the house immediately. Samantha packed up her things that night and moved to another place. But strangely, even after she left, Samantha still heard a knock on her door every night, no matter where she was. 3 knocks, regular, a reminder that, no matter where she hid, she could not escape something that had come to her before. Story 5. The Haunted Forest, a Whisper from the Dark. The forest on the edge of town is a place that locals always keep their distance from. Stories passed down through generations have made it a forgotten land, a place that people avoid mentioning, let alone entering. It is said that those who have lost their way in the forest never return, or if they do, they are no longer themselves. Their eyes are wild, they mumble sentences that no one understands. Rebecca, a young girl who loves adventure, does not believe in these ghost stories. To her, the forest is an interesting challenge. When her friends in the group refuse to join, she convinces Ethan, a close friend, to go with her. Ethan does not want to disappoint Rebecca, but he always has an unnamed worry in his heart. That morning, they brought along all their camping equipment and food. The sky was clear, the sunlight shining through the dense canopy of trees, creating a space that was both beautiful and mysterious. As they walked deeper into the forest, Rebecca laughed, trying to lighten the mood. "Ethan, you see? The forest is just a forest. What's so scary about it?" Ethan shrugged, his eyes darting around. "You say that, but the air here is strange. I feel like someone is watching us." Rebecca laughed, patting her friend's shoulder. "You're too sensitive. We're only here for a few days. It's just a small challenge." But even so, she couldn't deny the strange feeling the forest brought. The air seemed thicker, natural sounds seemed to be swallowed up, leaving only the sound of their footsteps on the dry leaves. They found a clearing and set up camp. The first night passed relatively peacefully, except for a few strange noises that Rebecca explained as the sounds of wild animals. But on the second night, things started to get strange. As Ethan prepared dinner, Rebecca sat by the fire, her eyes wandering into the darkness. Suddenly, she heard a faint sound, like a distant whisper. She turned her head, straining to hear, but there was nothing but the wind. "Ethan, do you hear anything?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan paused, listened for a moment, then shook his head. "No, nothing. It's probably the wind." But Rebecca wasn't sure. A feeling of unease began to rise in her. As night fell, they crawled into the tent to rest. Rebecca lay awake, her eyes wide open, staring up at the ceiling. The whispering sound came again, clearer this time, as if someone were standing right outside the tent. She shook Ethan awake. "There's someone out there," she whispered. Ethan jumped up, grabbing his flashlight. He unzipped the tent, shining it outside, but there was nothing but darkness. "There's no one, Rebecca. You're scaring yourself." But Rebecca knew she wasn't imagining things. The next morning, as they prepared to move deeper into the woods, they noticed strange tracks around the tent. Small footprints, like those of a child, but no trail leading to or from the spot. Rebecca and Ethan looked at each other, saying nothing, but both felt an indescribable fear. The next day, as they went deeper into the woods, they began to realize that things around them were no longer normal. The trees seemed denser, the branches intertwined into strange shapes. The air grew heavier, and it seemed as if the sun could not shine through the dense canopy. In the afternoon, when Ethan stopped to check his map, Rebecca took a short walk to find a water source. But when she turned back, Ethan was gone. She called out his name, but only heard an echo from the trees. Rebecca began to panic, running through the trails, but everything around her seemed to have changed. The trees looked the same, and the path she had just walked on suddenly disappeared. In the midst of her panic, Rebecca saw a figure looming between the trees. "Ethan," she shouted, but the figure did not answer. She ran after him, but when she reached the clearing, there was only an empty space. In it, there was a piece of cloth that she recognized as Ethan's shirt, torn and covered in dirt. As night fell, Rebecca had no choice but to find a safe place to take shelter. She huddled under a large tree, her eyes fixed on the darkness around her. But the whisper rang out again, this time right next to her ear. "You shouldn't have come here." Rebecca screamed, jumped up and ran, not knowing where she was going. Footsteps echoed behind her, but when she turned around, there was no one. After running for a while, she fell in front of a small lake. In the moonlight, she saw her reflection, but then another face appeared beside her. The face smiled, the eyes were empty. The next morning, the rescue team found Rebecca sitting motionless by the lake, her eyes lifeless and her mouth muttering, "Ethan, they took him away." Since then, no one has dared to enter the forest. Those who have heard Rebecca's story have wondered, who, or what, lived in that forest? And why does it not want anyone to return? Story 6. The Witch's Curse, Return from the Darkness. The village of Ravenswood lies peacefully among the hills shrouded in thick fog. But it is always associated with a dark legend about a witch named Isolde, who was burned alive in the 17th century. Before her death, she cursed the entire village, vowing to return for revenge. The villagers built a church on the exact spot where Isolde was executed, as a way to erase that terrifying memory. Centuries later, the curse seems to be just a creepy fairy tale. But everything changes when Evelyn, a young girl who has just moved to the village, begins to experience strange phenomena. The house she rents is near the forest, and every night, she hears the howling wind, accompanied by whispering sounds, echoing from the depths of the forest. At first, Evelyn thinks it is just the wind, but then other strange events begin to occur. One night, as Evelyn lay reading, she heard a knock at her door. She went to investigate, but no one was there. However, in the dim light of the moon, she saw small, muddy footprints leading from her door into the woods. Strangely, they only went into the woods and never returned. Evelyn felt a chill, but she told no one, afraid that they would think she was paranoid. The next day, she decided to tell the story to Mr. Bishop, an elderly villager known for his knowledge of local history. When he heard Evelyn's story, his face turned pale. He told her about Isolde's curse and how her spirit could return through small signs like whispering winds or strange footprints. "If you hear your name called in the wind," he said, "never answer. That is her way of tricking your spirit into the darkness." Despite her worries, Evelyn decided not to let the rumors affect her life. But that night, things became clearer. As she slept, she heard a small, whispering voice in her ear, "Evelyn. Evelyn." She jumped up, looked around, but saw no one. The room was completely empty, except for a cold wind blowing through it. She tried to go back to sleep, but her dream came to her like a nightmare. In it, she saw a woman in a black cloak, standing in the middle of a fire, her eyes burning with hatred, staring straight at her. When Evelyn woke up, cold sweat broke out on her forehead, and she realized that muddy footprints had appeared right in her room. Evelyn decided to go back to see Mr. Bishop the next morning. He told her that the only way to end the curse was to find Isolde's grimoire, which was said to be buried under the old church. "But you must be careful," he warned. "Isolde won't let you destroy that easily." That night, Evelyn took a flashlight and sneaked into the abandoned church. It was pitch black inside, and the air was thick with a musty smell. She groped her way through the room, looking for signs. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. When she turned around, she saw no one, but the light from the flashlight hit the wall, revealing a scrawled line, "They couldn't save me, and neither can you." Evelyn's heart pounded, but she couldn't turn around. She found a large stone slab under the pulpit and began to pry it open. Under the slab was an old wooden box. When she opened it, she found a black leather-bound book, filled with strange and incomprehensible symbols. But as soon as she touched the book, the air around her changed. A strong wind blew out her flashlight. In the darkness, Evelyn heard a voice, clearer than ever, "Do you think you can destroy me?" A shadow appeared, gradually taking the shape of Isolde, eyes glowing with anger. Evelyn trembled, but she knew she couldn't stop. She lifted the book and read aloud the first words she saw, hoping that this would be the way to break the curse. Isolde's scream rang out, piercing, and the shadow dissolved into nothingness. Everything was quiet again. The next morning, when Evelyn woke up, she found herself lying in the church, with the book burned to ashes. From that day on, the strange phenomena in the village gradually disappeared. People began to return to the area around the church, and Ravenswood returned to its former peace. But Evelyn knew that the curse never truly disappeared. In her dreams, she still sees Isolde, standing from a distance, looking at her with hateful eyes, a reminder that darkness is always waiting for a chance to return. Story 7. The Sleepwalker, the Secret of the Deep Sleep. Noah had lived a quiet life until his sleepwalking episodes began. At first, he would just wake up in strange places in the house, on the sofa, in the kitchen, or even on the porch. But as time went on, the events that happened during his sleepwalking nights became harder to explain. Each time he woke up, he felt an uneasy feeling, as if someone had been watching him all night. One morning, Noah woke up on the living room floor. But what frightened him was not that he could remember how he got there, but that he saw mud marks on the wooden floor, leading from the front door into the house. His door was still locked, and there was no sign of anyone breaking in. He tried to reason that he had just sleepwalked out and back, but the thought did not lessen his fear. To find out what was going on, Noah installed a camera in his bedroom. He wanted to know what he was doing while he was sleeping. The first night, the camera recorded him sitting up in the middle of the night, eyes wide open but lifeless. He got out of bed and walked out of the room without hesitation. His steps were slow and steady, as if he knew what he was doing. But what gave Noah goosebumps was that the video wasn't just him. When he played back the footage, he saw a shadowy figure flash across the frame. The figure stood in the corner of the room, watching him walk away. Noah couldn't figure out what was going on. He took the video to his best friend, Mia, who was always interested in paranormal phenomena. Mia watched the video and thought for a long time before saying, "Noah, maybe something is trying to communicate with you through your sleepwalking. But it's not exactly friendly." Mia suggests that Noah try placing a protective object, like salt or a religious statue, near his bed to see what happens. Noah does, but that night, things get even stranger. He dreams of standing in a dark forest, surrounded by whispers. In the dream, he sees a woman in a white dress, her face hidden by her long hair. The woman reaches out to him, her voice soft but haunting. "You promised you'd come back. Why did you forget me?" Noah wakes up in a panic, cold sweat running down his forehead. But what scares him most are the mud stains on his hands. He looks around and notices that the front door is wide open, even though he clearly remembers locking it before going to bed. Mia decides to help Noah find out what's going on. They look up the history of the house and discover that, years ago, a woman mysteriously disappeared in the area. It was said that she often sleepwalked and never returned one night. But what made Mia shiver was the picture of the woman. Her face looked exactly like the woman Noah saw in his dream. The next night, Noah decided to confront her. He set up cameras in both the bedroom and the living room, and recorded every sound. That night, he sleepwalked again, but this time, he dreamed that he was standing on the shore of a lake. The woman from his dream appeared, her voice echoing in his head. "I need your help. Go back to where it all began." The next morning, when Noah reviewed the video, he found himself getting out of bed, walking to the living room and standing still in front of the window, muttering incoherent words. But the scariest thing was that the front door slowly opened, even though no one had touched it. And a figure flashed across the frame, walking towards him before disappearing. Noah and Mia decided to go to the shore of the lake he had seen in his dream. When they arrived, they found an old necklace lying in the mud, along with an old piece of paper with the name of the missing woman. Mia believed that the woman's spirit was trapped and needed to be released. They held a small ceremony, placed the necklace next to a candle, and prayed for the spirit to rest in peace. From that day on, Noah's sleepwalking stopped. But he knew that, even though everything was over, the image of the woman in his dream would haunt him forever. Her empty eyes, and her whispering voice, "Thank you, but don't forget me." Story 8-inch Ghost in the Car, the shadow behind the wheel. Brian is a mechanic who works at a small garage on the outskirts of town. His daily work revolves around checking engines, changing oil, and repairing old cars. But everything changes one afternoon, when an older man drives into the garage in a faded, very old-looking car. The car is a 1960 sedan, the paint is dull, and the smell of mold and mildew is coming from the rotten interior. The man seems to be in a hurry, just handing Brian the keys and saying, "Finish as soon as possible, I'll be back to get it. Oh, and don't touch the stuff in the back seat." With that, he leaves without giving Brian a chance to ask any more questions. Brian begins to inspect the car. The engine seems to have been idle for years, and there is an odd coldness emanating from the car, even though it is the middle of summer. When he opened the car door, he noticed an old photo neatly placed on the driver's seat. In the photo, a young man stood next to the car, with a bright smile and bright eyes. Brian picked up the photo, curious about what the person in the photo had to do with the car. When it got dark, Brian decided to work overtime to finish the repair. He sat behind the wheel and started the engine. Suddenly, a cold air ran down his spine. Through the rearview mirror, he saw a figure sitting in the back seat, but when he turned around, there was no one there. Brian's heart pounded, but he told himself that he must have overworked himself. That night, Brian had a strange dream. He saw himself driving that old car on a deserted road. In the dream, everything became blurry, and he heard a gentle, but sorrowful voice. "I couldn't get home. Can you help me?" The next morning, Brian went to the workshop with a heavy heart. He told his colleagues about the dream, but they all laughed and said he worked too much. However, when he checked the security camera in the workshop, Brian discovered something horrifying. During the night, the car turned on its headlights and started, even though the key was not in the ignition. The headlights shone brightly in the darkness, and a faint figure sitting in the driver's seat appeared clearly. Brian decided to find out about the car. He searched the registration papers in the car and found that the car had belonged to a man named Richard, who had died 20 years ago in a traffic accident. According to the records, Richard had an accident on a deserted road while on his way home. But strangely, his body was never found. The car was then sold to many owners, and no one kept it for long because of the strange phenomena that occurred. That night, as Brian was about to leave the workshop, he heard a noise coming from the car. A light knock on the window, as if someone was trying to get his attention. As he approached, he heard a whisper from inside the car, "Take me home." Brian didn't know what made him take the key and get into the driver's seat. The car started smoothly, as if the engine had been running smoothly for a long time. The headlights turned on by themselves, and the steering wheel seemed to guide the way without him having to control it. The road ahead was strangely familiar, even though Brian knew he had never been there before. The car stopped in front of an old bridge, the place where Richard's accident was recorded. Brian felt a cold air rush in, and a faint figure of a man appeared in the driver's seat. The voice rang out again, full of emotion, "Thank you. Finally, I'm home." As soon as those words ended, the figure disappeared, and the car seemed to lose its life. The engine died, the headlights dimmed, and everything became quiet. The next morning, the old man returned to the shop to pick up the car. He looked at Brian, his eyes filled with gratitude, and said, "I know you helped him. This car belonged to my brother. You don't have to worry anymore. He's at peace now." From then on, Brian never saw or heard anything strange again. But every time he passed the old bridge, he still felt a strange sense of peace, as if Richard's spirit was smiling, knowing that he was finally back where he belonged. Story 9. The Faceless Man, the Horrors of the Dark. Elliot lives alone in a small apartment on the edge of town. His busy work routine keeps him from paying much attention to the strange happenings around him, but things begin to change when his neighbor, Mrs. Esther, mysteriously disappears. She is an elderly woman who lives in the apartment next door, and is known for her gossiping habits. One morning, the police knock on Elliot's door and ask if he has seen Mrs. Esther recently, but he can only shake his head. "No, I haven't seen her. Just heard her footsteps last night, like usual." After that, Mrs. Esther's apartment is vacant, and no one mentions her again. But Elliot begins to feel that something is wrong. At night, he often hears strange sounds coming from the hallway, slow, uneven footsteps, as if someone is dragging their feet. But every time he went out to check, the hallway was empty. One night, while Elliot was working late, the noise came again. This time, it was closer, as if right outside the door. His heart pounded, trying to convince himself that maybe someone was passing by. But then, a soft knock sounded on the door. 3 times, steady, but enough to make him freeze. Elliot quietly walked to the door, peering through the peephole. Standing outside was a figure, tall and thin, dressed in shabby black. But what sent a chill down Elliot's spine was the face, or, more accurately, the lack of a face. Instead of a normal face, it was just an empty void. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. He stepped back, his heart pounding. "This is a dream," he muttered, trying to convince himself that he was imagining things. But when he turned to look through the peephole again, the figure was gone. Elliot couldn't sleep all night. The next day, he told his best friend, Megan. Megan, who was always skeptical about the paranormal, just laughed and told him to rest. But when Elliot asked about Esther's disappearance, Megan became serious. "You don't know? They say she saw something. She used to tell people that there was a faceless man following her every night." The story made Elliot shiver. That night, he decided to install a small camera in the hallway to see if he could record anything strange. At night, the footsteps rang out again. This time, they were longer, slower, as if deliberately teasing him. But Elliot didn't open the door. He waited until morning to review the video. When he reviewed it, he saw a shadowy figure appear in the frame. It was the faceless man. He stood silently in front of Elliot's door for several minutes, his head tilted slightly as if listening to something. Then he turned away, but did not move. His body seemed to melt into the darkness, disappearing without a trace. Elliot began to feel like he was being watched. During the day, he always felt invisible eyes following him, even though no one around him seemed to notice. At night, the footsteps grew louder, as if the faceless man was getting closer by the minute. One night, Elliot dreamed that he was standing in the middle of an empty room. In the dense darkness, a voice rang out, soft but haunting, "You should not see me." When he woke up, he realized that his hands were shaking, and a long muddy trail appeared on the bedroom wall, as if someone had just touched it. With no other choice, Elliot went to the library to look up strange phenomena. In an old book, he found a passage about a creature called the Faceless Man, a wandering, cursed spirit that appeared to warn or punish those who accidentally saw it. The only way to avoid being harmed was to never look at it again. That night, Elliot closed the door, drew the curtains, and tried to ignore any sound. But at midnight, there was a knock on the door, not 3, but 5, slow, steady. Elliot huddled in the corner of the room, covering his ears, but the knocking continued, like a deadly rhythm calling his name. When everything was quiet again, Elliot mustered up the courage to open the door. But in the hallway, there was only a blank wall, and on it, written in something like blood, were the words, "You have seen me. I will return." Elliot left the apartment that night, moving to another city. But wherever he was, he could still hear the footsteps in the night, always getting closer. He knew that, wherever he went, the faceless man would never forgive him. Story 10. Wandering Soul, The Endless Journey. The story begins in the small town of Havenwood, where the old cobblestone streets and red brick houses give it a quaint yet mysterious beauty. Here, people often tell each other about a wandering soul that can never find rest. The soul is said to be that of a young woman, Clara, who died more than 50 years ago in a car accident right on the bridge outside the town. Since then, people say that every time they cross the bridge late at night, they can see the shadow of a woman standing by the road, as if waiting for someone. Jacob, a young reporter who has just moved to Havenwood, does not believe in ghost stories. He always seeks the truth and explains everything based on logic. When he hears about Clara's story, he thinks this is an opportunity to write an interesting article. He decided to investigate her death and spent time talking to the old people in town. Mary, who had lived near the bridge for decades, said, "Clara was a beautiful girl, but her life was miserable." It was said that she ran away with her lover on the night of the accident. Their car lost control and fell into the river. The boy survived, but Clara was never found. Her spirit is still there, searching for him, or perhaps finding a way to rest in peace. More curious than ever, Jacob decided to go to the bridge himself late at night. He brought his camera and a small flashlight. When he arrived, the air was strangely cold, even though it was a summer night. The wind blew through the trees, creating a whispering sound. Jacob turned on the flashlight and looked across the old bridge. It was covered with moss and had long cracks, as if telling the story of the tragedy years ago. Suddenly, in the dim light of the flashlight, Jacob saw a figure standing at the end of the bridge. It was a girl in a white dress, her long, messy hair covering half her face. Jacob took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He called out, "Is anyone there? Do you need help?" The figure didn't answer, just stood there, silent. As Jacob stepped closer, the girl slowly turned her head. Her face was pale, her empty eyes seemed to pierce through him. Jacob froze. Before he could do anything, the girl whispered, her voice echoing as if from a very far place, "Can you help me? I can't find my way home." Jacob didn't know where he got the courage, but he nodded. "I'll help you. What do you need?" Clara, or more accurately, her spirit, pointed to the river under the bridge. "You have to find what belongs to me. I can't rest without it." The next morning, Jacob returned with a team of divers, claiming that he was writing an article about the bridge accidents. After hours of searching the riverbed, they found an old silver necklace, faded with time. Jacob picked it up, feeling a strange sensation, as if the necklace contained a part of Clara's memory. That night, Jacob brought the necklace back to the bridge. Clara appeared, this time not as scary as before. She smiled sadly, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you. Finally, I can go." But just when Jacob thought everything was over, Clara said something that made him shiver, "But you know, souls like me can't go alone." Before Jacob could understand what she meant, a strong wind blew by, pushing him against the bridge. When he got up, Clara was gone, and the bridge was silent again as if nothing had happened. From that night on, Jacob was no longer himself. He often dreamed of Clara, standing at the head of the bridge, smiling and calling his name. The people of Havenwood said that every time they crossed the bridge, they saw not only Clara's figure, but also a young man standing next to her, his eyes filled with sadness. They said that wandering souls never walk alone. Story 11. Ghost Ship, Mystery of the Black Ocean. The sea has always been a place that hides deep mysteries that humans have never fully explored. Among the stories of giant sharks or treasures buried at the bottom of the sea, a legend has existed for many generations, the story of a ghost ship, a pilotless ship, drifting on the ocean with the whispers of trapped souls. Captain Marcus of the Eagle Wing freighter is not a superstitious person. During his 20 years working at sea, he has heard countless wild stories, but he has never believed in them. For him, the sea is just the sea, harsh, but controllable. On a moonless night, as the Eagle Wing was crossing a calm stretch of the Atlantic, the watchman reported a strange phenomenon. A large ship suddenly appeared on the radar a few miles away, but no signal was sent out. That was almost impossible in an age where every ship was equipped with navigation and communication equipment. Marcus stepped out onto the deck, holding his binoculars. In the darkness, he saw a huge shape emerging from the mist. The ship, long, huge, and old, seemed covered in moss and shells. Marcus could see the tall masts, but there was no light coming from it, nor any sign of life. "What is this?" Marcus muttered, trying to stay calm. He ordered the crew to bring the Eagle Wing closer to investigate. As they got closer, a strange chill settled over them, despite the previously warm air. As the Eagle Wing closed in on the mysterious ship, Marcus recognized its name engraved on the hull, Eterna. But what startled him was that the name was familiar. He remembered clearly that the Eterna was a cargo ship that had disappeared more than 50 years ago in a terrible storm. No one on board survived, and the wreckage had never been found. Marcus ordered a small boat to be launched so that he and 2 crew members could board the Eterna. When they stepped onto the deck, it was as if time had stopped. Rust streaks covered the wooden floors, and empty crates were scattered everywhere. There was complete silence, except for the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull. They stepped further inside, exploring the holds. Marcus noticed that something was amiss. The furniture was left untouched, as if everyone on board had suddenly disappeared. Coffee cups were empty, the dining table was still half-cooked, and a radio lay untouched on the table, gathering dust. But what scared them most was that the crew's coats and hats were still neatly hung up, as if they would return at any moment. One of the sailors suddenly screamed when he discovered a logbook lying on the console. Marcus opened it, the last pages filled with a scribble, seemingly written in panic. "They came from the darkness. They called our names. No one can escape." Suddenly, a loud noise came from below the hold, startling all 3. Footsteps, heavy and slow, reverberated from deep below. Marcus signaled the crew to retreat, but when they returned to the deck, a door was locked, and thick fog suddenly rolled in from all sides, obscuring their vision. Marcus heard a voice behind him. The voice was soft but haunting. "Why are you here?" When he turned, a shadowy figure appeared, a man with a pale face, empty eyes, and a forced smile that seemed to have been painted on. "Go, before it's too late," the figure whispered, and then vanished into the mist. Marcus and his crew broke down the door with all their might, ran back to the small boat, and hurried away from Eterna. But when they returned to the Eagle Wing, the ghost ship was gone, as if it had never existed. When Marcus returned to land, he told his colleagues the story, but no one believed him. The radar images of Eterna also disappeared, as if the sea had erased all traces. But Marcus never returned to those waters. It is said that on moonless nights, if you pass by the sea where Eterna once appeared, you can hear a distant call, echoing across the still water. "They never let us go." Story 12. The Silent Room, the Darkness and the Silence. Room number 7 in the Old Haven Hotel has always made people feel strange. Although the hotel is located in the city center and is always bustling, the room always has a gloomy and cold atmosphere. The hotel has tried to rent this room many times, but no one has stayed there for more than one night. They all leave with a look of horror and refuse to talk about what happened. Alex, a journalist who specializes in writing about mysterious phenomena, accidentally learned about the story of room number 7 during a conversation at a local bar. The narrator, a former employee of the hotel, said that the room never makes a sound. It is absolute silence, to the point that one can clearly hear one's own heartbeat. But the scariest thing is not the silence, but the feeling that someone is always watching from the darkness. Curious, Alex decided to rent the room to see for himself. When he received the key, the hotel manager, Mrs. Eliza, looked at him with a serious expression. "Are you sure you want to stay there? We are not responsible if anything happens." Alex chuckled, trying to appear confident. "I've been to places that are scarier than this. This room is just a room." When he entered room number 7, Alex immediately felt the difference. The air in the room was heavy, as if the space was being pressed by something invisible. There was no sound, no footsteps from the hallway, no car horns from outside, and even the wind seemed to be muffled by the window. He turned on the light and began to observe his surroundings. The room was simply furnished with a single bed, an old wardrobe, and a desk. But something was bothering him, an indescribable feeling, as if he were not alone. Alex turned on the tape recorder, set it on the table, and said loudly, "If anyone is here, give me a sign." There was no response, only absolute silence. He shrugged, convinced himself that he was being oversensitive, and continued writing. That night, as Alex lay in bed, he noticed something strange. Even with all the devices turned off, the room was still silent. No ticking clock, no breathing, everything seemed swallowed up in nothingness. He tried to sleep, but the feeling of being watched kept him from closing his eyes. Around midnight, Alex heard a small noise, like the creaking of wood, coming from the closet. He turned on the light, walked over, and opened the closet. It was empty, except for a small, cracked mirror in the corner. In the mirror, Alex saw his own reflection, but he was startled to realize there was another figure standing behind him. He turned around, but there was no one. Heart pounding, Alex picked up the mirror. When he looked again, the mirror only reflected his face, but his eyes in the mirror were different. They were empty and cold, as if they did not belong to him. He put the mirror down, feeling a cold air pass by. The lights in the room suddenly flickered, then went out, leaving the room in darkness. Alex stood still, not daring to move, but he knew for sure that something was in the room with him. A soft, very close breathing sounded behind him. He turned on the flashlight from his phone, quickly panning around. No one was there. But when the light shone across the desk, he realized that his recorder had been moved. He turned on the machine, and in the absolute silence of the room, a woman's voice rang out, "You shouldn't be here." Alex shivered, gathering his things in a panic. When he opened the door, he was startled to see Mrs. Eliza standing in the hallway, her face full of worry. "I told you," she whispered. "You shouldn't have gone in there." Alex left the hotel that night. But from that day on, he could no longer hear any sound normally. In the deep silence, he always felt like someone was whispering in his ear, reminding him of room number 7 and the darkness it brought. Story 13. Baby's Cradle, Lullaby from the Past. Sophie has just moved into an old house in the suburbs with her husband, Daniel. The house has an old-fashioned charm, with elaborate decorations and a lush garden in the back. Sophie loves the peaceful atmosphere here, but from the first time she steps into the attic room, she feels that something is wrong. In the corner of the room, covered in dust and cobwebs, is an old wooden baby crib, with elaborate carvings. The crib has faded with time, but still retains the beauty of a bygone era. Sophie thinks that the crib will be perfect if they have children in the future, so she decides to clean it and move it down to the living room. The first night, everything is peaceful. But on the second night, when Sophie and Daniel are sleeping, she hears a very faint sound, like a creaking cradle. At first, Sophie thought it was just the wind, but when she went down to the living room to check, the crib was actually shaking slightly. No one was there. Daniel, hearing Sophie's footsteps, followed. "What's wrong? Is something wrong?" Sophie pointed at the crib, her voice faltering. It's shaking by itself. I didn't touch it." Daniel frowned, moving closer to the crib. He gave it a gentle push, but it stopped shaking. "It could just be the old floor, honey. This house has been around for a long time. Maybe it's just the floor that's not stable." Sophie nodded, trying to believe Daniel's explanation, but the feeling of unease still surrounded her. The next night, while they were watching TV, Sophie heard the creaking again. This time, the sound was clearer, as if someone was pushing the crib. When Sophie turned her head, she saw that the crib was indeed rocking, even though no one was touching it. Daniel, now unable to deny it, stood up and said, "We need to find out about this crib. Something's not right." The two searched the attic where the crib had been. In a corner of an old cupboard, they found a small wooden box. Inside were black and white photographs of a family, a young woman holding a baby, standing next to a man with a stern expression. On the back of the photograph was written, "Eleanor and little Thomas, 1925. Along with the photographs, they found an old diary. The pages were yellowed, but the scribbled words were still legible. "Thomas was everything to me. But the fever took him. I couldn't bear to leave him. They said I should let him rest, but I couldn't. I'll keep him here, in the crib I made with my own hands." Sophie felt a chill run down her spine. Is she talking about the baby's spirit? Daniel was silent for a moment, then turned to the last page of the diary. The last words read, "They took Thomas away. But he'll come back. He always comes back." That night, Sophie couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the creaking of the cradle, this time mixed with a vague sound that sounded like a lullaby. The next morning, they invited a friend of Daniel's, who was an expert in paranormal phenomena, to check. When he entered the living room, he immediately said, "There's a presence here. Very strong. And it doesn't want to leave." The friend placed a candle and began the ritual of calling the spirit. In the heavy silence, a woman's voice rang out, soft but full of anguish. "Don't take me. Please. Don't take me." Sophie couldn't hold back her tears. "We don't want to hurt you. We just want to help you find peace." The voice fell silent, and the cradle stopped shaking. A cold air swept through the room, and then everything became quiet. Daniel's friend said, "She's gone. Her spirit just wants to be with her child. When she feels understood, she can leave." From that day on, the cradle stopped shaking. But Sophie decided to bring it back to the attic, to leave it where it belonged. She felt that, although the story had ended, the memories of Eleanor and baby Thomas would always be here, as a part of the house. Whenever Sophie passed by the attic, she would sometimes hear a very soft creaking sound, like a gentle lullaby from a distant past. Story 14. The Pale Shadow, the Man Behind the Shadows. Rachel's apartment is on the top floor of an old building in the city center. Despite the small space, She loves this place because of the quiet and the view of the city at night. But since moving here, she started to notice strange things, little things that she can't explain. At first, it was strange noises. One night, when Rachel was reading, she heard a knock on the window. But what scared her was that her apartment window was on the 12th floor, with no balcony or anything outside for someone to stand on. Rachel tried to push away her fear, thinking that maybe it was just the wind. But then the strange events continued to happen. Another time, while washing dishes in the kitchen, she felt like someone was standing behind her. She turned around, but there was no one. Just empty space and silence. Things took a turn for the worse on a rainy night. Rachel was lying in bed, the streetlights outside shining through the curtains, casting faint streaks of light on the walls. She was asleep when she woke up with a start, feeling unusually cold. Opening her eyes, she saw a blurry figure standing at the end of the bed. The figure was tall and thin, pale to the point of being almost transparent. It had no clear face, just a vague figure in the darkness. Rachel froze, unable to move or make a sound. The figure stood still, not moving, but its presence made her feel like there was a heavy air pressing down on her chest. When Rachel regained some composure, she quickly turned on the night light. As soon as the light filled the room, the figure disappeared. But the feeling of fear remained. Rachel couldn't sleep all night, and the next morning, she decided to tell her best friend, Emily, about this. Emily, who had always been curious about the supernatural, suggested that Rachel try putting a camera in her room to record what happened at night. Rachel didn't want to believe that her apartment was really strange, but she eventually agreed. That night, Rachel placed a small camera on her nightstand, pointed directly at her bed. She tried to sleep, but her fear still haunted her. The night passed quietly, but when she reviewed the video the next morning, she almost dropped her computer. In the video, she saw herself sleeping, her body almost motionless. But around 3 a.m., a blurry figure appeared, standing in the corner of the room. It didn't move, just stood still, as if watching her. After a few minutes, the figure approached the bed, leaned close to Rachel's face before disappearing. Rachel panicked. She decided to learn about the history of the building. After some digging through old documents, she discovered that more than 30 years ago, a young woman who had lived in the apartment had jumped from the balcony to her death. The cause of her death was unknown, but it was rumored that she was haunted by a ghost that appeared in the room every night. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. Was the woman's spirit still trapped here? Or was that pale figure the thing that drove her to her death? With no other choice, Rachel called in a psychic expert to help. When he entered the apartment, the expert immediately recognized the presence of a powerful entity. "She's not a demon," the expert said. "But she's suffering and stuck between two worlds. She needs help to find peace." They held a small ceremony, lit candles, and said prayers. Rachel felt the atmosphere in the apartment change, lighten, as if a burden had been lifted. From that day on, Rachel no longer saw the faint figure. But sometimes, on rainy nights, she still felt like someone was standing outside the window, quietly looking in, as if to say goodbye. Story 15. The Graveyard Keeper, a Promise Between Two Worlds. On the edge of a small town lies an old cemetery, where graves lie silently under the shade of ancient oak trees. It is the resting place of many generations of people in the area, but the most special thing about this cemetery is the story of the caretaker, Mr. Gregory. For 40 years, Gregory lived in a small house next to the cemetery, devoting his life to tending each grave, clearing each trail and making sure everything was neat, as a way to respect the deceased. When Gregory passed away at the age of 78, the people of the town held a simple but emotional funeral. His grave was placed right in the cemetery he had devoted his life to caring for. It seemed that the story of Gregory would stop there, but soon, strange rumors began to spread. It is said that at night, if you pass by the cemetery, you can see the faint light from the oil lamp which Gregory always carries when working, gliding across the rows of graves. Some people even hear the sound of heavy footsteps on the gravel, along with a soft whisper, as if he is talking to someone. Oliver, an archaeology student, came to the town to research the local history. When he heard about the cemetery and Gregory's spirit, he was immediately attracted. Oliver decided to find out the story, not only out of curiosity but also to confirm the mysterious things that the people rumored. One moonlit night, Oliver took a flashlight and a camera and entered the cemetery. The air was strangely cold, even though there was no wind. The large oak tree in the middle of the cemetery seemed to stand taller, like a giant standing guard. Oliver walked slowly, the flashlight beam sweeping over the old gravestones, some of which were so faded that the names could not be read. As he approached the center of the cemetery, he suddenly heard footsteps. They were heavy, slow footsteps, like someone on patrol. Oliver stopped, straining to hear more clearly. His heart pounded as he realized that the sound was not coming from somewhere else, it was coming from right behind him. He turned his head, but there was no one. There were only rows of graves, silent under the moonlight. But when Oliver shone his flashlight further away, he saw a figure looming among the gravestones. The figure was tall, wearing a long coat and a hat, exactly as the locals had described Gregory. "Mr. Gregory?" Oliver called out, his voice trembling. But the figure did not answer, just stood still for a moment, then slowly turned and walked away, the oil lamp in his hand glowing yellow. Oliver decided to follow. He walked through the small streets, but every time he turned a corner, the figure disappeared, leaving only a faint trail of light ahead. When he approached an old grave, the figure suddenly stopped. Oliver recognized that it was Gregory's grave. The inscription on the tombstone read, "Gregory Allen, our eternal guardian. Devoted for life, and beyond." Suddenly, the figure turned and looked straight at Oliver. Though the face was hidden in the darkness, Oliver could feel a sad but determined gaze. The voice rang out, soft but authoritative, "This place needs care, and I cannot leave without someone to replace it." Oliver stood still. Those words were not just an explanation, but also a message. Gregory did not leave, because he felt that his responsibility to the dead was not over. The next morning, Oliver told the story to the townspeople. Some nodded, as if they had known it all along. Others avoided it, not wanting to mention it again. But from that day on, Oliver often went to the cemetery, taking care of the graves and repairing the small roads. He felt that, in some way, he was continuing Gregory's work. Every night when darkness fell, Oliver would still see the flickering light of the oil lamp, a reminder that Gregory's spirit was still there, guarding and protecting. And he knew that as long as someone cared about the cemetery, Gregory could truly rest in peace. Story 16. The Vanishing Road, Journey into Nothingness. On a moonless, overcast night, Lisa drove home from a long business trip. The road wound through the countryside, where rows of dark trees stretched out on both sides like living walls. This was a familiar route that she had taken many times, but tonight, everything seemed different. A thick fog covered the ground, greatly limiting visibility. Lisa turned on her headlights, trying to see the road ahead clearly. Suddenly, she noticed something strange. The road she usually took disappeared, replaced by a new turn that led deeper into a dense forest. The new road had no name, but was paved smoothly, as if it had just been built. Lisa hesitated for a moment. She clearly did not remember such a road in this area, but her curiosity overcame her fear. She decided to turn in. The new road led her further into the darkness, the ancient trees on both sides towering, their branches intertwined as if they wanted to cover the sky. The clock in the car read 11 o'clock at night, but Lisa felt like she had been driving for hours without seeing another car. The air in the car was getting more and more stuffy. A strange feeling crept into Lisa's heart, as if someone was watching. She looked into the rearview mirror, but saw nothing but darkness. Suddenly, the car radio turned on, even though she hadn't touched it. A whispering voice rang out, the words unclear, as if it came from a very far place. Lisa quickly turned off the radio, but at that moment, she saw a small wooden house by the side of the road. The light from the window emitted a faint light. Her heart was pounding, but she thought this might be an opportunity to ask for directions. She stopped the car, got out, and approached. The door of the house was slightly open, creaking in the wind. Lisa hesitated, then knocked on the door. "Is anyone home? I'm lost." There was no answer. But as she was about to return to the car, a small voice called out from inside the house, "Don't go any further. Come back before it's too late." Lisa stood still, a chill running down her spine. She tried to look inside the house, but everything was dark. Without waiting any longer, she hurried back to the car. When she started the car and looked ahead, the road had changed. It was no longer straight as before, but curved, disappearing into the pitch-black darkness. With no other choice, Lisa continued driving. But as she drove, she realized that everything around her was repeating itself, the old trees, the curves, all the same. The clock in the car still read 11 p.m., even though it felt like hours had passed. She began to panic. "What's going on?" she shouted. Just then, the road came to an abrupt end, leading to a chasm. Lisa braked hard, her heart pounding. In front of her was deep darkness, with no sign of the ground or anything else. She turned the car around, trying to get back on the old road. But this time, the road behind her also disappeared, replaced by a thick fog. Lisa no longer knew where she was, or how to get out. At her most desperate moment, a figure appeared in the fog, approaching her car. It was a man with a pale face, empty eyes, and a voice that sounded gentle but authoritative. "This road is not for you. Leave before it's too late." Without thinking, Lisa drove in the direction the figure pointed. Suddenly, she felt a strong beam of light shining straight into her eyes, and when she woke up, she found herself standing at the familiar intersection where she had turned onto the mysterious road. The clock in the car still read 11 o'clock at night, as if no time had passed. Lisa didn't dare to turn her head to look back. She stepped on the gas and drove straight home without looking back. When she told her story to her friends, no one believed her. They said that there were no turns or roads leading into the woods. But from that day on, Lisa never went through that area at night again. And whenever she drove alone, she always felt like there was something waiting for her on the other side of the darkness. Story 17. The Forgotten Diary, Secrets That Should Not Be Told. Eleanor found the diary in a corner-used bookstore. It was tucked deep in a dusty corner, its dark brown leather cover worn and tattered, and it had a small rusty lock. Strangely, when she picked it up, she felt a chill run down her spine, as if the book held something that did not belong to this world. The shopkeeper, a stoic-looking old man, watched her intently as she brought the diary to the counter. "I don't think you should take it," he said, his voice low and hoarse. "Many have tried before, but no one has kept it for long." Eleanor laughed, thinking he was just adding to the mystery to convince her to buy it. She paid for it and took the diary home, not knowing that it would change her life forever. That night, she sat by her bedroom window, leafing through the worn pages of the diary. The first page bore a faint but legible handwriting. "This diary belongs to Anna Blackwood. Remember, once you read it, there is no turning back." Curious, Eleanor continued reading. The first few pages were just the everyday stories of Anna, a woman living in the 19th century. But as the pages progressed, the writing became more chaotic. Anna wrote about hearing whispers at night, about feeling like someone was watching her in the dark, and about strange dreams she couldn't wake from. The last page sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. Anna wrote, "I can't hold it in any longer. They are coming. If you read this, forgive me. And be careful, they will come for you." Eleanor slammed the diary shut, her heart pounding. She felt like someone was standing behind her, but when she turned around, there was nothing but darkness. The next morning, Eleanor took the diary back to the bookstore, but the old man was gone. The bookstore was closed, the windows boarded up with wood, as if it had been abandoned for a long time. Eleanor tried to reason that perhaps she had imagined everything, but from that night on, strange phenomena began to occur. She often heard footsteps in the apartment at night, even though the door was always locked. Small objects in the house were moved, and every morning when she woke up, she always found the diary lying on the table, even though she had put it in a locked drawer. One night, unable to bear it any longer, Eleanor decided to burn the diary. She took it out to the backyard, lit a match, and threw it in. But the fire flared up with unusual ferocity, then went out in a few seconds, leaving the diary intact, not burned at all. The first page was now changed. It reads, "You can't escape. Don't try." Eleanor feels herself losing control. She has bizarre dreams in which Anna appears, her eyes empty and her mouth whispering, "They're coming." These dreams not only exhaust her, but also make her feel like reality and nightmare are merging into one. With no other options left, Eleanor seeks out a friend who is an expert in the paranormal. After examining the diary, the friend confirms that it is cursed, and Anna's spirit is trapped in it. She can't move on, and the diary is her bond to the other side, the friend says. If she wants to be free, she must find a way to complete what Anna hasn't done. Eleanor searches for information about Anna and discovers that she used to live in an old house in the suburbs, which is rumored to be haunted. Anna tried to break the curse of the diary but failed, and her soul was trapped forever. That night, Eleanor brought the diary to Anna's old house. When she entered, she felt as if time had stopped. Shadows appeared and disappeared between the rooms, and Anna's whispering voice echoed everywhere. Eleanor placed the diary in the middle of the room and said loudly, "I've come to help you. Tell me what to do." Suddenly, the diary opened by itself, the pages flying through the air. A voice rang out, "Let them come, and take me away." In an instant, the room went dark, and shadows rushed towards the diary, engulfing it in a blinding light. When Eleanor woke up, the diary had disappeared, and the surrounding space was completely silent. From then on, the strange phenomena no longer occurred. Eleanor knew that Anna was finally freed, but she never forgot the final warning in her last dream: the curse never truly goes away, it only transfers to someone else. Story 18. The Dripping Sound, Secrets from the Dark. Moving into her small suburban apartment, Mia felt like it was the perfect start. The apartment was old but cozy, with large windows that let in plenty of daylight. Everything seemed perfect, until the first night. At around 2 a.m., Mia woke up to a strange sound: dripping water. She lay in bed, listening closely. A steady drip, drip sound came from somewhere in the apartment. Mia jumped up, turned on the lights, and went looking for the source of the sound. She checked the kitchen sink, the bathroom, and even the pipes, but everything was dry. Feeling uneasy but unable to find the cause, she went back to bed and tried to sleep again. The following nights, the dripping sound appeared again, always around 2 a.m. The sound was not loud but steady, like an annoying reminder. Mia was getting more and more tired from lack of sleep. She called the plumber to check, but they insisted that the water system in the apartment was fine. One night, while reading to relax, Mia accidentally heard the sound of dripping water earlier than usual. This time, she decided to turn on the recorder to determine the direction of the sound. As soon as she listened to the recording, Mia froze. The dripping sound was not alone, mixed in with a soft whisper, very quiet but clear: Mia. Horror began to creep in. How could the sound know her name? Mia did not believe in the supernatural, but this incident was beyond her logical explanation. She told her best friend, Laura, who loved mysterious stories. Laura, instead of being scared, eagerly offered to stay the night to find out. That night, they both stayed up until 2 a.m. When the dripping sound began, Laura immediately turned on the light and grabbed the recorder. They followed the sound to the corner of the bedroom, where Mia least expected it. But what was even more terrifying was that, as they got closer, the sound stopped completely, as if it were teasing them. "We should check the wall," Laura suggested, sensing that something was wrong. They pulled the bed away and noticed a faint stain on the wall, as if water had seeped through it long ago. But when Mia touched it, the wall was completely dry. The next day, Mia decided to look into the history of the apartment. She discovered that, a few years ago, a woman named Eleanor had lived in the apartment. Eleanor was found dead in the bathtub, with the water still running. The police ruled it an accident, but many people living nearby believed that Eleanor had committed suicide, and that her spirit was still trapped in the apartment. Mia felt a chill down her spine as she heard the story. She walked back into the apartment, feeling as if the walls were watching her every step. That night, the dripping sound came again, but this time it was more urgent, as if it wanted to convey something. Deciding to face her fear, Mia sat in the corner of the bedroom where the sound usually came from. She turned on the light, staring at the stained wall. Suddenly, the light flickered, and she heard a voice, no longer whispering, but clear: "Help me." The wall in front of her seemed to change. A blurry image appeared, a woman with wet hair, a pale face, and empty eyes. Mia screamed, backing away, but the image disappeared immediately, leaving the old wall as before. She called Laura for help, and the two decided to remove the plaster to investigate. Behind the wall was a small empty space, in which there was an old clock and a black and white photo of Eleanor, holding a small ring. Mia took those things outside and held a small prayer, put the ring and the photo in a wooden box to bury in the backyard. From that day on, the dripping sound never returned. But every time she passed the corner of the room, Mia still felt a slight chill pass by, like a thank you from the deceased woman. Story 19. The door that won't open, the secret behind the old wood. When Nathan moved into the old house deep in town, he couldn't help but be drawn to its strange beauty. The house was built in the Victorian style, with elaborate carvings on the railings and windows. But there was one thing in particular that caught his eye: a small wooden door in the attic, always locked and seemingly without a key. The previous owner had warned Nathan when he sold the house. "That door doesn't lead anywhere. It's just part of the design. Leave it alone," he said, his face serious. Nathan, who wasn't superstitious, just smiled and nodded. He thought it was just the way old people exaggerated things to add to the mystery. The first few days of living in the house, everything went smoothly. But on the third night, Nathan heard a noise coming from the attic. It was a soft, steady knocking, as if someone was standing behind the wooden door, trying to attract attention. Nathan decided to investigate. He turned on his flashlight and walked up the stairs to the attic. The wooden door lay still in the darkness, but the knocking continued. Nathan tried to turn the handle, but as the previous owner had said, the door was completely locked. Nathan's curiosity got the better of him, and he tried to use a knife to pry the lock, but the door wouldn't budge. He even tried pushing harder, but instead, he heard a soft sigh, as if coming from the other side of the door. Nathan felt a chill. He left the attic, trying to convince himself that it was just the wind or the old house. But since that night, the noises had become more frequent. The soft knocking gradually turned into a dragging sound, as if something heavy was being moved across the wooden floor. Every time there was a noise, Nathan felt a strange chill envelop the house. He decided to learn about the history of the house. Through the local library, Nathan discovered that the house had belonged to a wealthy family in the 19th century. But tragedy struck when the family's youngest daughter, Margaret, mysteriously disappeared. It was said that the girl was often locked in the attic as a punishment, and one day, she disappeared without a trace. Nathan felt a chill down his spine. Was Margaret still there, trapped between two worlds? He returned to the house, this time carrying a candle and a prayer book. Standing in front of the wooden door, Nathan lit the candle, reading aloud, "If anyone is here, I have not come to harm. I want to help." The door shook slightly, and a longer, clearer sigh came from the other side. Nathan tried one last time, pushing hard with his hand. The door did not open, but a small crack appeared, revealing a dark space inside. He shined his flashlight through the crack, saw a small chair and an old doll. The doll's eyes looked straight at him as if it were still alive. At that moment, the knocking stopped, replaced by a small, vague voice, "Don't open the door." Nathan retreated immediately, slamming the door and blocking it with a table. That night, he dreamed of a little girl in a white dress, her hair in disarray, standing in front of his bed. Her eyes were empty, and her voice rang out, "Cold, they locked me in there. Don't let them find me." The next morning, Nathan decided to leave the house. He didn't know exactly what had happened to Margaret, but he was sure of one thing: that door should not have been opened. The new owners later said that on quiet nights, they could still hear a soft knocking from the attic, a reminder that behind that wooden door, a dark secret awaited discovery. But no one dared to inquire further, knowing that some doors were best left closed. Story 20. The Ghost Bell echoes from the past. The small village of Willow Creek is famous for its green hills, ancient cobblestone streets, and an old church that sits alone on top of a hill. St. Mark's Church, with its towering bell tower, has existed for hundreds of years. But for a long time, no one has come here to pray, because the people are afraid of a terrifying legend, the ghostly bell. It is said that every night, if you stand near the church, you can hear the bell ringing 3 times, even though no one is there to pull the bell rope. The bell is said to be the cry for help of the spirit of the church's first pastor, Father Abraham, who died mysteriously in the bell tower more than 200 years ago. Amy, a young journalist, comes to Willow Creek to find out the truth about this legend. She has always loved to explore mysterious stories and believes that every mystery has an explanation. When she asked the villagers, she received wary looks and warnings. Don't go there at night, especially when the bells ring. Despite the warnings, Amy decided to go up to the church on a moonless evening. She brought a flashlight, a camera, and a notebook to take notes. As she approached the church, the cold air enveloped her, even though it was still midsummer. Stepping inside, Amy found everything covered in a thick layer of dust. Rotten wooden benches lay scattered about, and the altar had long been abandoned. But what caught her attention most was the bell tower. A spiral staircase led up, and each step she took made an eerie creaking sound. Reaching the top of the tower, Amy saw the giant bronze bell, still shining as if time had not touched it. The bell rope lay motionless, but at that moment, a sudden chime rang out, making her jump. The bells echoed through the valley, lingering as if they would never end. But there was no one else there. Amy tried to calm herself, took out her camera, and took a picture. When she checked the photo, she noticed a faint figure standing right next to the bell, even though she had been completely alone when she took the picture. She began to feel her breathing getting heavier, as if the air around her was being sucked away. Just then, a hoarse voice rang out, "You shouldn't be here." Amy turned around, but there was no one. She quickly walked down the stairs, but with each step, she heard footsteps following her. When she got back to her room, Amy tried to explain what had happened. She turned on her computer and looked up Father Abraham. According to the surviving records, he was a devoted pastor, but one stormy night, he was found dead in the bell tower, his hands still clutching the bell rope. It was unclear whether he had committed suicide or been murdered. From then on, the bell became a curse, ringing every night to warn anyone who dared to enter that the church was still not at peace. Amy couldn't sleep. She heard the bell ringing even in her dreams, as if it was calling her name. The next morning, she returned to the church, determined to find the final answer. This time, she brought a tape recorder to record everything. When she reached the bell tower, Amy placed the tape recorder on the floor and asked loudly, "Father Abraham, if you are here, please tell me what happened to you." At first, there was nothing but silence. But then the tape recorder emitted a sound like heavy breathing. A faint voice rang out, "They betrayed me. Set me free." Amy shivered. She didn't know what to do, but she sensed the pain in that voice. Before leaving, she lit a candle and prayed for Father Abraham's soul to rest in peace. Since that day, the ghostly bell has not rung again. But Amy knows that if someone breaks the silence of the church, the bell will ring again, carrying messages from the past. Story 21. Cold laughter, haunted by the dark. Sarah moved into a small house on the outskirts of town after getting a new job. The house seemed normal, with a small front garden and clean white walls. But from the first day she lived there, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. It all started on a moonless night. Sarah was lying in bed, trying to sleep after a tiring day at work. In the quiet of the night, she heard a strange sound. It was a laugh, soft, small, but cold. At first, she thought it was the sound of the neighbors, but when she listened more closely, she realized that the laughter seemed to be coming from inside her own house. She turned on the lights, checked everywhere, but found nothing. The windows were still locked, the front door was securely bolted, and everything in the house was still in place. Trying to calm herself, Sarah went back to bed, but the laughter kept coming back, coming from the darkest corner of the room. The next night, the laughter came earlier, just as Sarah was sitting in the living room reading. This time, the sound was louder and clearer. It lasted longer, echoing throughout the house, as if someone was standing right in the dark laughing at her. Sarah grabbed her flashlight and searched every corner, but again, she found nothing. She told her best friend, Emily, about this and invited her to stay the night. Sarah thought having someone else in the house would make her feel safer. But around midnight, as they sat talking, the laughter rang out again, this time from upstairs. Emily froze, her face pale. "You're not joking, are you? This isn't from a living person." The two decided to investigate. They searched through old documents related to the house and discovered a shocking detail. 20 years ago, the house belonged to a man named Harold, who was known for being eccentric. He was rumored to be a serial killer, and many of his victims were never found. It was said that Harold committed suicide in this house, and his haunting laughter was the last thing anyone heard before he died. Sarah and Emily felt a chill run down their spines. They decided to leave the house that night, but as they reached the door, the laughter rang out again, stopping them. Sarah stopped, looked around, and for the first time she saw a blurry figure standing in the corner of the room. It was a tall, thin man, with an indistinct face, but his body exuded a suffocating coldness. He just stood there, laughing, the laughter growing louder and more distorted. Emily screamed, pulling Sarah's hand and rushing out of the house. When they returned to the car, neither of them dared to say anything, just watching the house from afar. Through the window, they saw the figure still standing there, shoulders shaking with unceasing laughter. The next morning, Sarah decided to move immediately. The house remained abandoned for many more years, no one dared to go near it. But the neighbors still said that on moonless nights, if you stood nearby, you would hear the laughter, soft, long, and cold, like a greeting from the darkness that never slept.